This is Josh Olson. This is a video presentation on the Fukushima disaster that happened in 2011, the timeline, and its effects on the nuclear industry. The Fukushima disaster was caused by an earthquake and a tsunami. Initially, the units 1, 2, and 3 were operating, and units 4, 5, and 6 were shut down. At 2:46 p.m. on March 11th, an earthquake 9.0 magnitude was struck off the eastern coast of Japan. This did not damage the nuclear power plants, but it did cause the loss of external power. Almost an hour later, at 3:42 p.m., the 14-meter high tsunami struck the plants and flooded the diesel generator rooms, which were in the basement of the power plants, and caused a loss of power on the site. At 7:03 p.m., a nuclear emergency was declared on the Fukushima site, and from March 11th to March 12th, the evacuation radius extended from 2 kilometers up to 20 kilometers. There was also a 30-kilometer stay indoors and no-fly zone that was instated on March 15th. And there was a 50-mile U.S. advisory zone on the 16th of March. The number 1 reactor was the first to be damaged because it lost its emergency core cooling system capabilities the soonest. At 6 p.m. on the 11th, the reactor 1 water level reaches the top of the fuel. Number 2 and 3 reactors had some battery power that weren't ruined by the tsunami, so they were later to run out. At 2:44 a.m. on March the 12th, reactor 3 runs out of battery power. And at 4:15 a.m. fuel was exposed in the reactor number 3. At 5:30 a.m. the containment vessel was vented in Unit 1. This was for reducing pressure so water could be pumped inside of it. It took this long to vent the containment because they required compressed air and electric batteries to be delivered to the site before they could accomplish that. This venting happened after the fuel in reactor number 1 was damaged, so the steam mixed with the fuel cladding to produce hydrogen, which when that was vented, some of it leaked into the top of the reactor building in unit number 1. This caused a hydrogen explosion because the hydrogen mixed with the oxygen in the air. At 7 o'clock p.m., they were able to commence injecting seawater into reactor number 1 using portable pumps. These graphs are for reactor number 1, which was the first reactor damaged. They were retrieved from a TEPCO report that was made after the Fukushima accident. TEPCO is the company that owns the Fukushima reactors. On the left, there's reactor water level and how it changed over the time, and it shows after the earthquake and then the tsunami that caused the loss of power, which caused the reactor water level to drop. And then after it gets to the top of active fuel, and then it gets to the bottom of active fuel and causes core damage. On the right is the maximum core temperature over time, and you can see that the maximum temperature goes down because the plant was shut down and scrammed after the earthquake occurred, and then the tsunami happened, and then approximately when the top of active fuel is reached on the left graph is when the core temperature starts to rise until it levels out at temperature, and the graph ends when all the fuel is melted, and the fuel ended up melting through the bottom of the reactor. Reactor 3 was the next reactor to become damaged. The left graph is case number 1, which assumes water level was maintained because measured values show the actual water level, and case number 2 is water level was dropped, which assumes the measured values don't show the actual water level. As you can see, the high pressure coolant injection system stopped working properly on the 13th of March, and that caused the water level in the reactor to drop. Then they started injecting water, but the safety relief valves opened because the pressure was too high, which caused the water level to drop again. As you can see, the water level is below the top of the active fuel, so that caused the fuel to become damaged. Reactor 2 was the last reactor to become damaged. The graph looks similar to Reactor 3's, except its reactor core isolation cooling system was the one that failed. And they also started injecting water, and a safety relief valve also opened. On March 16th, TEPCO believes the fuel rod storage pool, which is where they keep the old fuel or used fuel, may be boiling. On the 17th of March, they dropped water in the fuel pools by helicopters. They also later sprayed water with hoses into the fuel pools, and eventually they started to begin to restore the electrical grid, and they brought in a bunch of fire trucks to continuously spray water, like in the fuel pools and on the reactors. In the reactors, the reactors were stabilized about 2 weeks after the accident with the seawater injection, and by July they were cooling the reactors with water from a treatment plant they built, and in December they achieved the cold shutdown condition. The nuclear industry in the United States made some safety enhancements to minimize the chance of what happened in Fukushima from happening here. Some of those include Industry Emergency Response Center in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., pressure release vent in some boiling water reactors to try to prevent hydrogen explosions from venting, because that shouldn't have happened. Additional spent fuel pool monitoring, ensuring power supply to plant systems, additional on-site safety equipment, emergency preparedness enhancements, because after the tsunami a lot of the roads were blocked and they could always use more fire trucks for spraying water, and additional flooding and seismic protections. After Fukushima, all the nuclear power plants in the US submitted evaluations on how exposed they are to seismic and flooding events, and the plants at the most risk are submitting even more detailed evaluations on how they will affect their safety and what they can do to mitigate these effects. Those evaluations are still ongoing, and there's also 2 new national response centers. These response centers are located in Memphis and Phoenix. They store up to 5 sets of emergency equipment, such as portable backup generators, pumps, diesel tanks, electrical distribution cabinets, standardized hoses, and couplings. Equipment is able to be shipped to anywhere in the United States within 24 hours, any nuclear plant. The operating costs are split by nuclear power plants. These would have helped out in Fukushima because they were unable to get the proper equipment to the plants in a timely manner. and some of the equipment they did get was incompatible with their plant, so this is all like standardized, like flexible stuff that can be used for many purposes. Each reactor has a flex plan, which this is for having flexible equipment available to use in case there is a loss of power at the plants. Also, spent fuel pool instrumentation is now going to be required at nuclear power plants. There was no issues with the Fukushima spent fuel pool instrumentation. No damage was done, but they could have focused on other places if they would have known that there was no issue in the fuel pool instrumentation. The new guidelines will require 3 levels to be able to be indicated. The top level is for normal cooling to the pool. The middle level is for radiation to minimize it, and the lower level is to maintain the fuel covered. The public perception has been greatly reduced, and this has reduced demand. The nuclear power has more negative perception due, according to multiple polls. The country of Germany sped up the phase out. They were initially just going to use all their nuclear power plants until they got too old, and they expected to have them all phased out by 2036, but they moved that up to 2022, and they immediately shut down after Fukushima many of their nuclear power plants. Italy was planning before Fukushima to generate 25% of their electricity from nuclear by 2030, but they canceled that plan after Fukushima. And France currently gets 75% electricity from nuclear, but they have passed bills that will drop this to 50% of their total electricity. My sources were worldnuclear.org and nuclearenergyinstitute.org.